Let's compute the variance and standard deviation for the data set to the left. Now you're going to notice we have two columns, A and B, both have 15 numbers. So we're going to be working with 30 total numbers here. Now, if you remember, the standard deviation talks about the spread of data, and it is found by calculating the square root of the variance. So the variance and standard deviation, we'll talk about the spread of data about the mean. So really, how far away are the majority of the data points in comparison to the mean? Standard deviation is more user-friendly than variance, but you have to calculate variance to get standard deviation, especially when you do it by hand. So we're going to do this with the population and then the same data set as a sample, because if you do it by hand, you'll remember that the population divides by the sample size, while the sample divides by the sample size minus 1 to adjust for the differences in a sample and a population. So let's start with the population. We're finding the variance. If you don't know the formulas, you can go into formulas, more functions, statistical, and there's a whole bunch of them. Or you can say, I know I want to find the variance, so let's start with that. So you can see we have var.p and var.s. That's variance, and the P stands for population. So I'm going to click on that, and now you can see I need the numbers that are in this calculation. So I'm going to come over to A1 and click, and then drag so that my entire data set is included. So everything in that rectangle that has the dotted box around it, that's going to be included in my variance. My variance is 34.5955. There we go. Standard deviation, same idea. Standard deviation. So you see stet dev. Well, we want the population. So I want stet dev P, because that is standard deviation for the population. Again, I need the entire data set. So I click on A1, drag to be the entire data set, close my parentheses, and hit enter. Now, earlier I mentioned that the standard deviation is just the square root of the variance. So just for fun, if I take the square root of the variance, you can see it's the exact same thing for my standard deviation. Okay, so now let's see how it changes when we look at this from a sample. So we're going to use the same formulas, except we're going to use the .s because it's a sample. So I'm going to use the same data set, close the parentheses, and you can see my variance slightly higher. And that's because we're dividing by a smaller number, right? We're dividing by n-1 instead of n. So same holds true for our standard deviation. We're going to use stdev.s. Get my entire sample here. And so again, you can see slightly larger than the deviation for the population. So they're not hugely different. Obviously, it would depend on your data set on how big the difference would be. But if you're looking for a specific calculation, it does matter whether you are dealing with a population or a sample. So pay attention to the wording so that you make sure you use the right formula when you're working in Excel.